Hello everyone, my name is Liu Yi. I'm from Jiangxi University of Finance and Economics. Welcome back to my class of International Macroeconomics. In this section, we will talk about how pegs work and the mechanism of the fixed exchange rate. In this section, we are going to talk about how pegs work based on the mechanism of fixed exchange rates. Let's firstly assume a real situation. For example, the peso is the home currency and pegs to the USD with exchange rate equals to 1. Meanwhile, the central bank buys and sells assets in open market to control the money supply. Hence, if there is no foreign exchange reserve for the central bank to buy and sell, the peg is broken. Moreover, the interest rates of two countries are also equal. Y represents the output. Since the price is sticky in the short run, so the home country's price is fixed at 1. According to purchasing power parity theory, the home price equals to the foreign price, while in the long run, its price level will keep at 1 only when the exchange rate is kept at 1. The home country's demand for real money balance can be expressed as a function of output and nominal interest rate. So M over P equals to LIY. To simplify this assumption, we said monetary base only includes money. To replicate the whole process, we also need to combine with the central bank's balance sheet. Assumptions for the central bank are as follows. First, the money in circulation is the only liability of central bank. Second, when the central bank purchases a quantity B pesos of domestic bonds, it generates a money supply B and make up some of the bank's domestic assets. The same, if the central bank purchases foreign currencies for R dollars, it will become its foreign exchange reserves. In total, the money supply in home economy equals to B plus R. Similarly, changes in money supply equals to change in domestic credit and that of the reserves. For example, if the central bank buys additional reserves, delta R, that is $1,000, the money it spends as delta M, that is $1,000, to money in circulation. If the central bank creates additional domestic credit of delta B or 1,000 pesos, it buys 1,000 pesos of government debt, and this also adds delta M or 1,000 pesos to the money in circulation. The central bank balance sheet is similar to that of a corporation. The left column contains all assets. In this case, there are foreign reserves and domestic credit in this case. The right column should be liabilities. It's money supply for the central bank. Especially, we assume the exchange rate is fixed if and only if the central bank holds reserves. In the same way, the exchange rate is floating if and only if the central bank has no reserve. So, the first question has been solved. If the central bank wants to maintain the peg, its reserves must be kept at the level of R equals to M minus B. Moreover, as money supply equals to its demand, so M can be replaced by PLY. According to the above questions, we find if the central bank brought more reserves than required, home money supply would expand and the home nominal interest rate would fall. Further, the peso would appreciate and peso would break. To prevent this, the central bank would intervene in the forex market to offset its initial purchase of reserve. Conversely, if the central bank sells reserve for pesos, it has to buy back reserves. In this way, the central bank could constantly keep the peso supply. This picture can help you understand the central bank operation better. 45-degree line, reserves at 0. And the money supply M equals to domestic credit B. Variations in the money supply along this line would cause the exchange rate to float. There is a unique level of the money supply M, or $1,000. It ensures the exchange rate to be at its chosen level. To keep the money supply at the required level, the central bank must make a combination of assets on its balance sheet. It corresponds to points on the vertical line XZ. At point Z, reserves would be at 0. At point X, reserve would completely consist of the money supply. This is known as currency board system. In addition, any other point on XZ is a valid choice. For example, at point 1, domestic credit is 500, reserve are 500, and the sum of them equals to M1, 1000. To make a short summary, if the exchange rate is floating, the central bank balance sheet must correspond to points on the 45-degree floating line. While the exchange rate is fixed, the central bank balance sheet must correspond to the points on the vertical fixed line. There are various kinds of shocks can affect the stability of pegs. Firstly, let's look at how shocks to money demand influence it and how the central bank defends the peg. When output falls or the foreign interest rate rises, the money demand will decrease. For example, suppose we start with a central bank balance sheet as given earlier. Initially, money supply is M1 or 1,000 million pesos. Suppose money demand then fall by 10%. This would lower money demand by 10% to M2, 900 million pesos, and a fall in the demand for money would lower the interest rate in the money market and put depreciation pressure on the home currency. To maintain the peg, the central bank must keep the interest rate unchanged. To achieve this goal, it must sell $100 million of reserves in exchange for cash. Thus, the money supply are as much as money demand. Thus, the central bank balance sheet becomes as follows. You may look at this figure and analyze it in detail. Figure 9-5 has shown the above process vividly to us. When money demand falls, interest rates tend to fall, leading to pressure for depreciation of exchange rate. To prevent this, the central bank must intervene in the foreign exchange market and defend the peg by selling reserves. This will lower the money supply. The bank's goal is to keep the interest rate fixed and to ensure that money supply equals money demand. As shown here, the money supply declines from M1, 1,000 to M2, 900. Since the domestic credit hasn't been changed, so the change in the central bank balance sheet is from point 1 to point 2, and the reserves reflect the money demand shock by falling from R1 to R2. In the same way, an opposite positive shock is the move from point 1 to point 3. As in the currency board system, the money supply is completely consisted of foreign reserves. So a currency board adjusts money demand shocks is moving from point 1 to point 2 or point 3. We have recognized when the money supply is wholly made up by foreign reserves is very different from other situations. So the backing ratio is crucial to the central bank. The backing ratio is calculated by reserves divided by money supply. Generally, a higher backing ratio will better insulate the economy against running out of reserves. In our example, money demand and money supply fell by 10% from 1,000 to 900. But reserves fell by 20% from 500 to 400. The proportional fall in reserves was greater than the proportional fall in money, because reserves were initially only 500 and just a half of the money supply. When money demand fell by 100, reserves had to absorb all the change, with domestic credit unchanged. The backing ratio is 0.5 or 50% initially. So the central bank could absorb up to 50% decline in the money supply because all reserves run out. Specifically, a maximum backing ratio of 100% is maintained at all times by a currency board. So the central bank can respond to any shock to money demand without running out of reserves. Thus, currency boards are regarded as hard peg. That's because their high backing ratio should endure them with greater elasticity while facing shocks to money demand. There is another question need us to consider. That is, why the level of money demand change? In our assumption, it originates from shocks to output or the foreign interest rate. For emerging markets and developing countries, since the outputs are fluctuating, the cautious level of reserves should be much higher. What is more, if the peg is not fully credible and simple interest parity falls to hold, the home interest rate will no longer equal to the foreign interest rate. And additional disturbance to home money demand can be caused by the spread down of the two,